Hi guys, my name is Terrell Boyer. I'm a sales engineer here for Samsung Electronics, and today I wanted to talk about a question that I've gotten a couple of times over the last week or so, and I just wanted to do a quick video to show you guys how to configure this scenario. So the scenario is we have an AP here that's installed at a remote site, remote on a completely separate network from the actual access point controller. And the way that AP is configured is it's going to be configured to locally bridge the traffic. So meaning that any traffic, the user would associate to these SSIDs here, and based on which SSID they associate to, the traffic would flow into the local switch on the remote site into VLAN 703 or 704 in our test scenario. Let's scoot that over. So associate to SSID, and then that SSID is going to drop that traffic locally into the local switch on the proper VLAN. This is the scenario that we're going to configure. The alternative to that is we could actually tunnel the traffic all the way back through the router, through the firewall, across the internet, through the remote firewall, through the remote router, remote switch, all the way back to the controller, and then from the controller we could drop it back into the switch on the proper VLAN. That's tunneled mode, and what we're talking about today is going to be locally bridged, where the AP is actually remote. And again, for the test scenario, we're going to set up two SSIDs, one for corp and one for guest, and we'll put those in the proper VLANs. Okay, so let me log into my controller here. Actually, the first thing I want to show you is the switch port, so that you can kind of see. I'm not going to show you how to program the switch, but I'll show you what it looks like from my side. And let me just drag this over here. And so I have the access point plugged into port 24. So we're going to skip down here and look at 24. Okay. So what this is it's a hybrid switch port. So it's not access, it's not trunk, it's somewhere in between, where we're allowed to have both tagged and untagged traffic on the same port. For untagged traffic, I have my VLAN 703. This would typically be your management VLAN, so the VLAN that your APs would be deployed into. Also, anything that we don't tag will get thrown into that VLAN as well. And then I have allow 704 tagged, so this is tagged traffic on VLAN 704, and that will be associated to an SSID here in a minute. So both tagged and untagged traffic on the same switch port, and this is going to be that switch port here that the AP is plugged into. So hybrid switch port, 703 untagged, 704 tagged. Okay, going back to the controller. Alright, to start with, let's go ahead and create us a couple of WLANs. So we have those. And what did I say we're going to call those? VLAN Corp and VLAN Guest. And it's for this particular exercise, it's very beneficial to have the profile name something meaningful. So we're going to call this V Corp, and we're going to call this VLAN underscore CORP. And we're not going to assign an interface group here because we'll create that in the AP group. So we'll set it for local bridging, and we'll do both bands. Okay, so apply, put in my secret password. Okay. And then I'm going to add one more VLAN, or one more wireless LAN, which is going to be VLAN. We'll call this vGuest, and VLAN underscore guest. No interface group, locally bridged, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Apply. Super secret password. Apply. Okay. And as with all WLANs, they come disabled in our configuration until you enable them. Typically, you'd want to assign a security policy before you enable those, but for the purposes of this lab, I am not. So I'm going to go ahead and enable. Okay, so we have these two WLANs created and enabled. The next thing we want to do is build an AP group. If you already have one for this particular site, you can use that existing one. Just make sure it has the R here, and I'll show you how to get that R. So we'll do here one for VLAN test. And this R right here, so it sets it up as a remote access point. And I'll show you why that's important here in just a minute. Okay, so now we're going to go into that particular AP group, VLAN test. And what that checking that remote does is it creates this tab here, which is our remote AP group, which is what we need in order to be able to associate the SSIDs to the VLANs. So let's go ahead and click there. And we'll start at this furthest tab, which is interface, and work backwards. So VLAN interfaces. So this is the equivalent of building out your VLAN database. So if you've worked with VLANs a lot, you know that's the first step, is add the VLAN to the database. So we're going to add VLAN 703. We'll call it 703 just so I know what it is. And we're going to go ahead and add another VLAN 704. And we'll also call it 704. Apply that. Okay. And then we need an interface group. Interface group is going to be 703. 703. Now, the purpose behind an interface group is if we wanted to associate multiple VLANs to a particular SSID to where it split the load or allowed 802.1x authentication or Active Directory to set the VLAN. So that would be possible with associating multiple VLANs to the same interface. So here it's asking me for group name 703. Which VLAN do I want to assign? I'll go ahead and say 703. And apply. And this is a 1-to-1 ratio, the way we're setting it up. If you don't have a need for multiple VLANs in an interface group, then you'll create it as a 1-to-1. So what that means is we need to go back into interface. And up here under interface group, we need to add a second one, 704. And I just use the VLAN IDs to keep it easy for me to know which VLAN I'm impacting through programming. Okay, and let's go back to interfaces here. Oops, I forgot one step there. So we'll go back to 704. And I need to move the appropriate VLAN into the interface group. I think it's already applied, but we'll do it anyway. Alright, so now if I go back and look at interfaces, we created the VLANs in the database here, and then up here we added the interfaces to the interface group. So now we have two interface groups, one called 703, one called 704. We're not going to do anything with DHCP, so we'll skip over here to our ACLs. Now what we want to do here is we want to enable local bridge forwarding. and apply that. And then for the purposes of this lab, we're going to leave 703 untagged, so it'll drop into the native VLAN of the access point. But for 704, Alright, so one thing I need to do is I haven't assigned any wireless LANs to this AP group, so we're going to assign the two that we created, these two here. And then we also need to assign which APs we want these SSIDs to show up on. And the one here at my house is going to be this one here. AP5 is the one I'm using for this test. So the purpose of an AP group is to marry up the access points with the associated wireless LANs that you want on those access points. So that's all that we've done here. So there's my SSIDs. They're set for local bridging. And then we're going to go back to our remote AP group. We'll go over to ACL profile. And here now our wireless LANs will be populated. And so what we're going to do is, let's look at our diagram here. 703 is our untagged traffic. So that's going to be SSID VLAN Corp. This could be your management VLAN and tag everything else. And in our case, it's going to be untagged. It's going to be 703 Corp. So the only one I'm going to worry about tagging is 704 guest. And then anybody else that associates, if there's no VLAN tag, it's going to drop into that native VLAN on that switch port. So we're going to tag 704 guest. So we're going to go which WLAN, guest, which interface group, 704, and add. Okay. There you go. And that should be everything that we need to do here. So let's go ahead and test that out. Okay, and here you can see I've associated to the SSID of, let me just double check, VLAN Corp. And I've fallen into my native VLAN, which is 703, which hands out an IP address of .73 range. So now I'm going to switch VLANs and go to, or switch SSIDs, and we're going to go to VLAN guest, connect. We're going to do an IP config here. And now you can see I've been given an IP address in the .74 range. So again, just to recap, we have an SSID of VLAN Corp. This traffic is untagged after it gets associated. And so it's dropping into the native VLAN on the switch port. The next VLAN that we have is, or SSID that we have is guest. And that goes into VLAN 704, which is tagged on this port. And if you had more SSIDs that you needed tagged traffic for, then you would just continue to add them to the tagged traffic on your switch port, and then just continue to add those interfaces within the controller. All of this is configured under an AP group that's configured as a remote AP group. So let me show you that one more time. So this is, no, VLAN test, here we are. So VLAN test with an R, that gives us the indication that it's a remote AP group. The remote box is checked here. And then obviously you want to have your access points added to the remote group. So all your access points at this remote site would be listed here. And then any wireless LANs that you want associated here would also be listed in here. And then as we go over to remote AP group, I start at the interface, so start on the outside here. add your VLANs to the database. So these are all the VLAN numbers that you want to support. All the VLANs, just like in the controller, get added to an interface group. That way, if you wanted to have more than one VLAN in one group, you could do that. But in our case, we're just doing a one-to-one. So I match the VLAN number as the name, and I just put one interface in there. So it's a one-to-one ratio. Once I've created my interface groups, then I'm good to go over here and associate the SSID to the actual interface group. So I just go to the drop down here, select the WLAN, the interface group, and hit add. And at that point, it's done. So this is how you would configure your VLANs for a remote access point that's configured for local bridging. Hope this is helpful, and if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for your time.